Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, we are diving into the topic of remote work, since many of us now work from home due to the needs of our personal lives or working together with colleagues from around the world. We'll be discussing how to stay motivated and avoid burnout with our guest, Steven Puri. Steven is the founder and CEO of the Sukha Company, with the mission to help millions of people find their focus, achieve more, and have a healthier work life. Steven's career started as a newscaster and interviewer for the #1 youth news show in the DC Baltimore market on WTTG-TV, and then as a junior software engineer and Thomas J. Watson Scholar at IBM. After attending USC in Los Angeles, he began working in film production and produced computer-generated visual effects for 14 movies, including Independence Day, which won the Academy Award for Visual Effects. Steven's first tech company was Centropolis Effects that produced those CGI effects, and he eventually sold it to the German media conglomerate Das Werk when he was 28. Steven then produced some indie films and eventually went studio side to develop and produce live-action features as a VP of development and production at 20th Century Fox, running the Die Hard and Wolverine franchises, and an EVP at DreamWorks Pictures for Kurtzman Orsi Productions, where he worked on Star Trek, Transformers, and more. After Fox, Steven returned to building tech companies and founded the Sukha Company. Sukha means happiness from self-fulfillment in Sanskrit. The Sukha is a focus app that bundles all the tools necessary to have a focused experience and a healthy, productive workday. So, with this wealth of knowledge to draw from, we are very excited for Steven to be joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys very much for having me. Hope you're having a great Monday morning over there.
Yeah, we are so far. It is not quite 11 yet, and we're getting the show started with an amazing guest that I'm really excited to hear from you today. So you obviously have a very varied career path, and this is really interesting to me. Can you tell us a bit about how that's gone, some of your proudest achievements, and then, of course, how you developed an interest in remote work?
Well, I'll tell you, to be very concise about my story, the things about it that I think would be interesting to someone about why does he have something to say, what has he studied, is that I've had a series of very lucky things that have happened in my life, and I've worked hard to make the most of them, right? So if I were to tell you at 15 years old, did I think I'd be on this podcast with you talking about sort of the modern work environment? Probably not. However, it's a very interesting ride that I'm on. So that said, you're right. I began in software engineering. It was something I knew because both my parents were engineers at IBM, and I learned how to code. I was a little code monkey when I was a teenager, right? So I worked during college, making money doing that. Went to USC, where they have a fantastic cinema TV school. And I know you guys have the AFTRS. You've got Swinburne and some wonderful schools down there. And a lot of my friends in the dorm were aspiring, Spielbergs and Lucases. So that led to this career in film where the CG bridged me going from an engineer to being a producer and then producing a lot of films. And then when I went back into technology, there were some things that I saw in film that I thought were really interesting. And these are a lot of the lessons that I share, because in film, for over 100 years, it has had the full spectrum of remote, hybrid, in-person work. In different stages, the film has every bit of those. And there are established ways in which you as a leader know how to lead it. There are established ways, if you're an individual contributor, you know how to manage your brain, manage your time, manage your creativity. And those techniques are established. But the thing is, in film, it's never been really called remote work. Like we're in the remote period of this film, right? It's like, oh, we're writing it. Oh, we're in pre-production. Oh, we're in post-production, that sort of thing. So it was very interesting because I was, as you said, running a tech company when the pandemic happened. And suddenly there was a large cohort of companies that hadn't contemplated how could you work effectively remotely as a leader, as an IC. And that forced this world where, Zoom became a verb and, we all had to find new ways to work together. So in the modern world, and this is sort of the end of it, what I see is very interesting is there's this tug of war. Post-pandemic, there is we all must return to the office. You're going to be fired or docked or not promoted if you're not here 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. This is how we work at JP Morgan Chase, But there is also a large contingent of people and companies that have religion around, oh no, we've discovered remote and it's so fantastic, or we've figured out how to do hybrid. And I found a lot of techniques from the film days map really well to solve some of those problems, both to make you feel more fulfilled during the day if you're creating, if you're producing, if you're generating work, or if you're leading a team that generates work. And that's what I love. That's actually my passion right now is talking a lot about that.
Wow, that's really interesting. I love what you said as well about the film industry. And you mentioned Swinburne, where I actually have some friends there, and seeing their work is really fascinating as well. So I'm interested to find out what you've got to say about that world as we get into it. But before we do that, we just wanted to get to know you a little bit better. So I have a few more casual questions for you. First of all,
here comes
what
that
do
part
you
of the
like-
podcast. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. What do you like to do in your spare time?
In my free time,
Yeah.
I have a daily yoga practice that yields me not only a sense of calm and clarity, it also yielded me a wife. It is where I met Laura. We were practicing together in Manhattan, and I'd seen her in there. And I'll tell you, you meet people in yoga, and it's interesting because people sort of self-select. Like you meet a certain kind of person who wants that spirituality mixed with a great workout.
Yes.
And that physicality and spirituality was really important to me. So I still, to this day, have a daily yoga practice. It's been 10 years since I met Laura. And that's really important to me. I also love learning really useless trivia. And I know this doesn't relate to what we're going to talk about today, but I'm just going to say if we became friends, you'd be like, oh, Steven, my friend who knows useless trivia. Steven, tell us something about, so-and-so. And I probably have read or stored something away around why it is snakes have their scales go in one direction, not the other. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, that's great. I get really competitive at trivia when I'm like playing trivia with friends, but the truth is that I'm really bad. So it's not a very good mix of competitive and being pretty bad at it. So that's really funny.
As long as it makes you happy.
Yeah, until I lose. But yeah, I do love a bit of trivia and I love finding out useless information. So that's great anyway. My next question for you is, do you have a book or a movie that you've enjoyed recently that you'd like to recommend?
You know what? I'm going to give you a couple offbeat ones because I know a lot of people probably quote like current stuff, blah, 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 but I'll tell you some like weird ones you may not have watched or read. There is a book that was written by Will and Ariel Durant called The Lessons of History. And you may know them because they were a famous married couple that wrote The History of Civilization, like a 7,000 page hyperbole, story of human civilization, how we developed, right? So at sort of the end of their life, after spending most of their adult life writing The History of Civilization, which I think is 11 action volumes or 13 volumes, and they sat and they wrote a very concise book. And it was like the distillate of what did we notice? What are the patterns that are so true of humans? And it is absolutely fantastic. You can choose any chapter out of there. Some of the chapters are maybe even 3 to 5 pages long. You could have an entire dinner party around one chapter because, as Blaise Pascal said, like when you've really thought about something, you can be concise. And they have that. And it is as revelatory as like the first time you read Malcolm Gladwell or the first time you read, whoever your great like psychological thinker is, you go, oh, wow, that's a great insight into how we work, right? This book is filled with them. So I offer you that as an offbeat, rarely cited book that is very digestible, but brilliant. And you also asked about movies, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so This is probably an unfair one because I've seen more movies than most people. So I will
Mm-hmm.
not choose some obscure, I'm not going to choose a super obscure one. Like there was a Hungarian black and white film in the 40s that you have to go see. I'm not going to do that to you. Um, but I will tell you, having worked on a lot of action movies, of big budget, summer, we're swinging for the fences kind of movies, you do know that they have certain beats that they all hit. I'll give you an example, right? Sarah, our hero, is going to save the day in the third act because she's an amazing archer. She's going to shoot the flaming arrow through the eye of the dragon, which is going to explode and, save the universe from Loki or whatever, right? You know that in order for Sarah to do that as the writer or the producer developing it, that in the first act, we have to have a scene where Sarah's like at the archery range and sort of demonstrates like she has some skill. So in the third act, it's believable. And there's a fantastic director, Billy Wilder, who said this very succinctly. He said, third act problems are first act problems. And what he was saying is, if the audience is complaining about the end of the movie, it's not usually the end of the movie. It's that you didn't set it up in the beginning, right? So I tell you this because when you develop action movies or, any sort of like action adventure, there are a lot of these sort of established pieces where it's like, okay, she's going to have the flaming sword in the end. We have to see her sword fighting in the beginning. Got it, right? There's a movie that has had 4 or 5 sequels, made a ton of money, and it defies one of the fundamental laws of these movies. And I mean, Star Wars hews to this, like Star Trek hews to this, like go down the list, everything hews to this. And it's a movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark that spawned the Indiana Jones franchise. Should you ever watch it, you will realize the end of the movie has nothing to do with the hero. The
Wow.
the movie would end the same way if the hero had never been born. But the character writing is so brilliant. You love the movie. It spawned, I think, 4 sequels at least, maybe another one. Because they just created a character like, I just want to see what this guy does. And if you think about it at the end, you go, he actually did nothing that affected the movie would have ended the same way if he had never been born. So I offer you that as an offbeat, but
Yeah.
not obscure choice.
Okay, that's amazing. That's a great recommendation. And that book as well is so interesting to me personally. I actually studied like archaeology and ancient history at university. So
Ooh.
now I'm interested in the civilization book that you've recommended there. I think I should probably go and have a look at that.
I'm just saying. What else
yes.
do you have? I'm ready for the next one. Fire away.
Podcasts. Are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
Okay, it would be so cheesy to talk about your podcast. So let's not. Let's say every
Okay.
other podcast in the world other than yours. How's that? Fair?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. So I will mention that I do on my own. I always listen in the car. That's my time of like listening to podcasts, which I think a lot of people do, the commute to and from or whatever they're going to the gym, right? So there's that.
Yes.
So I don't watch a lot of podcasts, a little dangerous driving, but I do listen. And I do listen to, I'm going to say 2 kinds of podcasts so that none of my friends who are podcast hosts get upset that I didn't name the thing. I do listen to some that are about mindful spirituality. I am not a big fan of organized religion for organized religion's sake, but I think that there is a deep truth underneath most religions that is about spirituality. And sometimes we as humans are bad at codifying it and administrating, the idea of spirituality and God, but there's something deeply there. And there's some podcast hosts that do get at that. And the other one is absolutely like brain hacks, straight up like, do you understand that this is a way to get your brain to operate in this way? And I love stuff. It's a lot of why I do what I do, that way of understanding your brain. So, okay.
Absolutely.
Ready. Don't ask me sports questions. I have nothing for you. I'm really bad at sports, but I got anything else.
Great, that's good because I'm not good at sports either. My next one for you is, do you have a role model? Now, this could be in your personal life or professional life. Up to you.
Good question. Actually, there is someone, there are 2 people. I'll say 2 people that are very different that I both think have aspects of something where I'm like, wow, if I could emulate that or if I could find that part of me and build it out, I'd be incredibly proud by the end of my life. One of them is a guy, Stephen J. Ross, who came up. He was very but from all accounts, and I've not met him. My brother's actually met him before he died, but by all accounts, incredibly personable, like hardworking, clever guy. And I'll give you an example. One of the first businesses he ran, his wife, Carolyn Rosenthal, her family owned funeral homes. And he was talking to his father-in-law and just said, "What do you do with the hearses and the limos at night?" And he's like, "Well, nothing. We're a funeral home." He said, "Do you mind if I start a business renting out the limos?" And he did that in New York, and it became a thriving business. He eventually bought Seven Arts, which became Warner Seven Arts, which became Time Warner. And he was the CEO and chairman of that. And he built out of practically nothing. Like, he did not come from a ton of money. A really amazing dynasty in film. Like, when he had these two guys, Terry Semel and Bob Daly, running Warner Brothers, it was the era when Spielberg, Eastwood, Mel Gibson, you may know him, a bunch of people were all making their films there, just because the vibe at the studio was this one of like celebrating creativity and making successful films, but like really like deeply respecting, what you're doing. How can I support you, as opposed to, you're here to waste our money and we're here to guard it against you, which a lot of studios do. So Stephen J. Ross is definitely one, and the other one straight up is Mahatma Gandhi, where the idea of changing the course of history for that many people by preaching nonviolence is unparalleled.
So, on the topic of things that have inspired you, is there a course or a class that you've taken that has inspired you?
Yes. When I was at USC, there was a class, Classics 340XG, and it was the psychoanalysis of dreams and myths. And I remember this so clearly because a buddy of mine who was a senior, I was like a freshman or a sophomore, he said, "Oh, you have to take this class. It's really easy. It'll fill it out while you're taking all these hard classes, and it'll satisfy like a general ed requirement, right?" So I took this. On the first day of class, the professor said, "Listen, I've been named to the reaccreditation committee for the university. So I know some of you are here because you heard this is an easy class. It shall no longer be an easy class." By the second class, half of the people had dropped, right? They were like, "Oh
Right.
my God, this is not what I signed up for," right? I stuck it out. And he actually taught a very interesting class, which was, if we treat myths as, the collective dreams, like you talk about in Jungian and all that, and you apply Freudian psychoanalysis to them, how do you understand them and thereby understand us? And his thing was, if these have been repeated for 1,000 years, that only happens when there's a fundamental truth. And can we uncover that through psychoanalysis of these myths? And it was an amazing class in terms of understanding people my entire life.
Wow. That's so cool. And I'm kind of jealous because there was a class that I think would have been similar in my course that I never got to take because I did a double degree with music and, I didn't have room for it. It was like myths and religion or something like that. And I wish I had have been able to do it. But anyway, we're going to move on now to our
These are great
interview.
questions. Great questions. Okay,
Yeah,
ready.
it's really fun. We're going to get stuck into our topic now, but before we dive too deeply, we're going to get some definitions under our belt. So first of all, how would you define personal productivity?
It's interesting that you add personal to that, because what I
Yeah.
would say is that if I were to define for you productivity, it is the output of something meaningful. It is, this needs to be done. Build this bridge, arrive at a new invention, thought, do something that is a meaningful output, right? Something hopefully of greater good than I scrolled through TikTok and learned nothing, right?
Yeah.
When you add personal to it, I think that adds a sort of narrowing factor, which is, then you're sort of saying, like, this may not be for the good of the company unless I decide it is. This may not be for the good of society unless I decide this is a personal goal to be part of the good of society. So personal productivity, I would say, is when you are contributing in a meaningful and thoughtful way to something that you believe in, which very well may be a team effort or it may be a societal effort. But that's how I define it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And secondly, how would you define remote work productivity, but from a more psychological perspective?
Here's the thing is, what is so interesting with remote work and some of the enforcement around it is there's a basal belief, well, if I can't see you working, and I don't know what you're doing minute to minute. Do I trust you? Are you doing the thing that contributes to this team, this company, this thing, or are you napping, or you work on your side hustle, or something like that, right? So when you talk about how does remote factor into productivity, I am going to go back and tell you a little sort of illustration on the film, how that industry works, because it's going to be very important to understand the kind of things that I have to share in this episode, which is in films begin, and TV series too, begin remote. It is writers alone in their homes or in coffee shops or their writing partners' homes or whatever, writing away. When it arrives at hybrid, you've usually found like a producer or someone who has some money, some belief in the script, and maybe open a small production office. The writers are not there every day. No one's there every day of the week, usually, maybe the line producer. But you come in for a day or two a week. There are very specific meetings. Oh, we need to talk about location scouting. Oh, okay. Tell us more. When you're writing the scene, like we envisioning like a countryside with cliffs, or is it by the sea, that sort of thing, right? So you do that a couple days a week, and then writers go off to write, scouts go out to scout, customers go to find costumes, that sort of thing. Then you are on set at 100,000 or more a day. It is in real life, you're kind of in-person work. You were there day and night, months at a time. But then that becomes post-production, which is hybrid again. Picture editors, sound editors, Foley artists coming, producers coming in and out. And then it goes back to remote. Through each of those stages, there are very clear techniques about how, as I mentioned, to lead those. If you are the producer or you're the studio executive on that, you're like, here's what we need to do. Or if you're an individual contributor, what your part is. So when we talk about remote, what I think is interesting is because there is this tug of war right now around like, do you need to be in the office or not? If you really dig underneath that, a lot of that is simply saying, I'm not sure what activities need to happen in person, which are optimized in person, and which are actually optimal to do on your own. So I'll give you a concrete example. In working in film, I have had numerous video conferences and phone calls and things like that, right? I have never experienced the kind of creativity that I've had when I'm actually in the room and you can feel the vibe of people. And there's something indescribable about it. Many people have tried to quantify it or qualify it, but I'll tell you, I've never seen something like that so clearly as, being in the room, you just have that weird vibe. And it doesn't mean you're staring at each other going, Sarah, what's the next great moment? And you're like, I don't know, maybe he grabs the orb of power. It's not that. It is, you could be walking. You say, hey, let's all go for a hike. In the course of doing that, you have that idea. But there's something about being like the energy of being around people, right? But then there are absolutely other parts where I'm going to use you again because it's fun, is you say, you know what? I need to go do deep work. And I kind of need you out of my field of view. So I can choose to do this in an office or a cubicle somewhere in an office environment, or I can do this in another environment I choose, which could be whatever is optimal for you. One brain hack that I love, and I want to share this, is you will learn as you start to optimize your environment, especially if you have a work anywhere or a work remote or a work hybrid sort of existence, that you can train your brain to slip into certain modes more easily by physically where you are. And I'll give you a funny example. So when we were you mentioned Independence Day, right? So Roland and Nadine and I started a company together. I got to know them really well. And when they were writing, they would always rent this beautiful villa in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. And they would talk about it because it stimulated this thing in them. There's like the light in the morning came in from a certain direction over the pool, and it was this all white sort of house. And they just felt like there was a clarity of thought that happened, that creativity spun. So they wrote 2 or 3 of their movies leading up to Independence Day there. Of course, when Roland was like, okay, we need to go write this next thing, rent the house. And the assistant came back and was like, somebody rented it already. It was like disaster around the office. It was like, oh my God, the world is ending. There's going to be no next movie. We can't do this. Right? And Roland called his attorney, John Deemer, who's a fantastic attorney. I was like, John, buy the house. John, buy the house. Buy the house now, John. Right? And he did. I don't know where the people in the house went, but by Monday they were gone and Roland owned a house in Puerto Vallarta, which I think he still does to this day. But they went down there, and that was their thing of saying, we are so mentally trained to be in that room to write their thing. And they wrote at the time the 3rd highest grossing movie in history, right? I saw that years later in a very different way with Alice Kurtz and Bob Orsi, with whom I worked. Transformers went into Star Trek, Eagle Eye, all that kind of stuff. And they met really as college students. So their memories of coming out of writing were not, multi-million-dollar villa in Puerto Vallarta overlooking the beach. They remember dorm rooms. And this may sound crazy, but like when they had to buckle down, it's like, oh my God, Transformers 2 is due in 3 weeks. They would have their assistant rent them a hotel room at the Universal Hilton, which is not a luxury hotel. Let's just say it's a very affordable business hotel near the studio. And they would work out of there because it evoked in them that feeling. Their mind was like, oh, right, we're in dorm room mode. We're those scrappy writers who have to bang out the script. And it worked for them. So that was a very interesting thing that I found. I violated that. I'll tell you, when I started, when I got out of film and I started working at home, I started taking advantage of the fact that it's like, oh, I made breakfast. You know what? I can just work at the kitchen table for a while. Super convenient. Light's nice and pretty. I can see the neighbors. End of the day, you know what? This sofa looks really super comfortable. It's a laptop. I'll put it on my lap. I'll work here. And I absolutely started violating that rule. And I was losing focus. A lot of the problems that I will talk to you about solutions are solely because I have a procrastination issue. I have ADHD. And I do have certain problems where I was like, this is a thing. If I don't solve this, I'm not going to achieve what I'm going to want to achieve. And that was something I trained myself. I was just like, I'm going to take an upstairs bedroom, turn that into my office. When I walk in there, it is for work. When I leave there, I'm leaving work. And it has made life very different for me. So long answer, but there you go.
No, that's great. I have heard of this concept before of the space. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same of what you were just saying, but the term sanctity of space and like having really dedicated spaces. I think, yeah, that's what we're getting at. And that's really interesting. My next question for you then is, what are some of the psychological factors that influence motivation and focus in this remote work setting?
Okay. I'm going to acknowledge that a lot of what I share with you is because, as Newton said, if you stand on the shoulders of giants, you see further, right? So I don't want to take credit for many of these ideas. When I decided to dive deeply into this a few years ago, I read the books because there are a lot of smart people who have written about this. So whether it is, oh, this is a great idea that James Clear has expounded upon, or Cal Newport, or Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I want to share those. People don't have to go read 2,000 pages of these books. I'll be super blunt. You read the top 12 books. They have very similar ideas. They have their own lexicon. They need to sell you their $24.95 book, right? And they need to pad it out to 300 pages because you're not going to pay $25 for a 30-page summary. But very similar and powerful ideas. What you bring up, the best answer is really to say, let's talk about flow states. So, as I think you've touched upon in earlier episodes of this pod, there is this hyper concentrated state. It's different than hyperfocus, which is true with ADHD. Sometimes you get this tunnel vision with hyperfocus, but it is rather a state of a concentration where you can achieve your best. You lose track of time, and you hear these great quotes from high performers talk about it in their own way. And I love to quote, there's that, although I'm not a sports guy, but there's that great Michael Jordan quote about, when I'm in the zone, it's just me and the ball. And what he's saying is like, I don't see the defenders. I don't see the stands. Like it all falls away. It's just, I'm there in flow. And the Picasso quote about, yeah, I forgot to drink and I forgot to go to the bathroom all night, but hey, I was up painting and, what do you think? Guernica, pretty nice, right? So I'm kidding a little bit about the last part, but that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, whom if anyone wants to, I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, but if anyone wants to read his book Flow, he dug down and he said, what is this? What are the conditions precedent that allow it? What are the mental practices that allow it? And what exactly, how can it be harnessed? And he named this concentrated state flow because he said at a certain point, it is not just your own efforts that are moving you forward. It almost is like you're on a river and the river is carrying you at the same time that you're paddling. And I first experienced this on a plane when the Wi-Fi was out. Thank you, American Airlines, right? And I remember thinking, how can we be landing? We just took off. And I'd done all these, I had to do some mock-ups or some designs. And like 2 hours and 40 minutes had gone by you could have asked me and I'd been like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. We just took off. Like, I don't know. And that experience of, wow, I got all this done. I felt super relieved because I didn't have to land, then go to a hotel and finish my work. I was like, this is done. And I was very intrigued. Like, what was that happened? And a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, which is very generous of you, the platform that I built was built around the idea of like, how could I replicate that? How could I have that experience of, let me get this done in such a way that I feel self-fulfilled, I feel happy, I feel sukha, which is that Sanskrit word from yoga about like, oh, I feel great, I'm doing the thing I'm meant to do and I'm good at it. And to bring, now we've set the table a bit, let me bring that back to your question, which is, how can you do that? And he's very clear about certain aspects of it. The thing you have to do, you have to believe it's meaningful in some way, right? If you are like revising a spreadsheet that you know no one's ever going to look at and it's absolute just like drudge work, you're probably not going to get into that state because you just don't believe it's meaningful, right? So you have to believe it's meaningful. Another part is you have to have skills that apply toward that task, right? So Michael Jordan painting, probably not going to get into a state of flow. Same thing with Picasso, handle a basketball, probably not going to be in flow, right? So you have to, the task has to be matched to your abilities, and it also has to be challenging. So if it's just Michael Jordan standing underneath the basket, tossing balls up, he's probably not going to get into flow. So as you recognize, what am I good at? What is it I contribute to my own company or the company that I'm contributing to, whatever it is, you know what your skills are. And it's easier to get into flow when you're doing something you're like, this is what I meant to do. Like, this feels good. I am a great copywriter. I happen to design really well. My sense of color space is amazing. I can tell you why these colors are complementary and why they evoke this emotion and why they've been used over thousands of years to evoke this emotion, right? That sort of thing where you just go, yeah, I got this. I'm good at this. And when you allow yourself the opportunity to flex those muscles, it feels fantastic. And that's kind of, these are some of the important ways in which you get into flow. Another aspect that he talks about and a number of people talk about is music. There is for most people, I'm going to say this is for most people, you always have the friend that has to listen to like heavy metal or, like mumble rap or something. That's their way of, studying or working, right? We all have that friend that does that. So I'm talking about the 80% of the bell curve. And that is, 60 to 90 beats per minute. There's a lot of research on this, certain key signatures, rhythmic, non-vocal music that allows you to lull into like, I'm just doing this. And, I happen to know a lot of film composers. We have like 1,000 hours of flow music in my platform simply for that reason of saying like, hey man, what if you want upbeat down tempo, if you want to listen to this, like find your jam, find your path and just like get into flow. It feels so good. So those are a number of things, not to belabor the point, but a number of things you can do.
Yeah. That's amazing. I was actually going to mention music more as from my own perspective. I play piano, and that's kind of where my flow state most often comes out. And I find that I did, a degree in composition, but when I'm sitting at the piano and I'm improvising or writing music, I will often be recording myself, and half an hour will go by, and I'm like, where did that go? Like that went really quickly. So I definitely have experienced that.
You get it.
Yeah. I think I know what it's like. So, I mean, we've been through this, but I wanted to now touch on some of the challenges. What do you think are the biggest challenges that people face working remotely, trying to stay motivated and productive?
Okay, so I have the benefit of having spoken because I speak to the community that I run a lot. So across hundreds of people that I've spoken to, just saying, tell me what's hard, tell me what I can help with, tell me how do you solve that? Like, is that solution sufficient for you? Or how could that solution be better, more beautiful, or more delightful for you, right? So I'm going to share, I always joke about, the plural of anecdote is not data. So this is anecdotal, but multiplied across hundreds of people that I've been speaking to over 6-7 years. So the number one thing, and this doesn't always show up on surveys, but when you dig down with people, when you get to know them, they talk about this, which I'm going to call the cold start problem. Some people call it inertia. Some people call it, many different things. But it is that sense of, okay, it is the time that I should start working, 8:30, 9:30, whatever it is in the morning. And I know this is what I should be doing. And for some reason, I'm procrastinating. I am quickly checking my emails to make sure, I should, if you're working remotely, like you said, I could throw in that load of laundry and then that will be going while I'm doing my work this morning. Or I didn't do the dishes from last night. Or worst case, I'm going to go scroll, pick up my phone and scroll. And I've had that problem. I am guilty of this, right? So that cold start problem, once people admit it to, they feel comfortable and they're like, hey man, this is actually a thing. And you read about it and you dig down through like, well, why is that? Well, why do you feel that way? It is very often overwhelm. Overwhelm for one of two things. Overwhelm for, I look at my task list, there are 17 things on it. I know they all technically need to be done, but my God, how do I even conceive of getting 17 things done right now? It just seems like, let me go to the bathroom or let me go get a glass of water, something like that, right? So you sort of retreat you have emotional retreat into procrastination because there are too many things. Another aspect is that there's something on there that's just not achievable. When you set yourself up and your first task is like, write my new book, you're not going to write your whole new book today, but it is technically a task. And people very often do that. And it's something like, for example, we built a smart assistant in my platform that when it sees you do something like that, it'll stop and go, hey, Sarah, you know what? Write your book is a great idea. What if we were to choose something you could do in 45 minutes? Like, what if it was outline chapter 3? Because I know that's where you are in your book, right? And you're like, oh, actually, when I was driving yesterday, I did have an idea for chapter. I could bang that out. And then suddenly you get over that feeling of like, it's insurmountable. This thing you're to like, oh, outline? Yeah, I can bang that out and I'll probably revise it tomorrow. I'll be fine, right? So that is the number one problem that I hear about, which is the cold start thing. That's a little bit about why. And there are other reasons why. Don't get me wrong. This is a generalization. I'm trying to, on a short podcast, give the middle of the road answer, which is that procrastination around the cold start thing usually stems from one of those two things in the people with whom I speak. I'll tell you another one is, and this is an emotional thing where people get down on themselves, and I've been there, is the end of the day, I didn't get through all this. I guess, I'll get up early tomorrow. I'll start early tomorrow. I'll get a jump on it. I'll try and finish the stuff that I have to push onto tomorrow's list. Before I start on tomorrow's list, I'll get these things, right? That sort of thing, right? And it's a terrible feeling. I've done that to myself countless days. And it is rarely, as I've found taking into this, because you didn't set out an achievable list. It was crazy. At a certain point, it's like, no, this is an achievable list. I didn't use my time and my brain energy well, And as a matter of fact, this is when Laura and I, let me back up. This is how I named my company, is Laura and I were going on our honeymoon. And for like 10 days in Bali, because again, we do a lot of yoga and, the yoga bar and everything in Bali is really fun. So we were going there and I needed to name the early stage of this company. And I talked to Laura and I was like, hey, you know what? This is an amazing gift from the universe that, when you run a small company, people are asking you questions all day long when you're on any company, right? And I was like, for 10 days, everyone knows to kind of leave me alone because you and I are here on our honeymoon and they're not going to bug me. So maybe this is the gift from the universe where I'll have my unconscious mind kind of bubble something up. It'll be like, oh, you should call this company blah, 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 right? And she's like, okay, cool. So I was like, what if on the first day I speak to a couple of our power members in these early days and ask them like, what's their favorite feature or something? Because that'll help, the back of my mind come up with the thing. She's like, go for it. I'm going to the pool. You can have your Zoom call, like enjoy, right? I'll catch up with you at dinner. So I do 3 of these the first day. And the third one, that was kind of okay. I was kind of asking dumb questions. And the third one, about 8 minutes in, and I'd asked for only 10 minutes. I was like, Sarah, can you chat with me for 10 minutes? Sure. Da, da, da. Tell me more about how did you find us? What was appealing to you? Da, da. So about 8 minutes in, I'd ask the dumb questions. How'd you find us? What's your favorite feature? Blah, blah, right? And I was going to the wrap up. Sarah, thank you so much. It was actually a guy I was talking to. Thank you so much for taking the time. I promised 10 minutes. I want to let you go, but this has been really helpful. And he said, Steven, you didn't ask the right question. And I was like, okay, what was the right question? He's like, you should have asked me, why do I pay you? And I was like, okay, I probably am a little too diplomatic or, maybe afraid to ask something so bold. But yeah, if I were to ask that, what would you say? And he said, here's the deal. At 3:00, I can be playing with my kids. Or at 6:00, I can say, where did the day go? The difference is, did I get into the Sukha in the morning? He said, it stops me from some of those little things that waste my life. The little, I'm just going to watch that YouTube video real quick, and then I watch a second one. Oh, I should look at this email, and then it has a blog post in it, and I open the blog post, or read the blog post. He's like, my kids are 2 and 4, and I want to see them grow up. And this allows me to do that. So that's what I pay you for.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, that is more articulate than anything I have ever said about my own company. Like, thank you. So of course, I'm all excited. I go to dinner with Laura. I'm like, oh my God, I talked to this guy today. He had this great way of talking about it. What do you think about this? And she's like, yeah, that's really good. That's better than anything you've said. So I was like, okay, cool. So we go and like, brushing our teeth and going to bed that night. And she looks at me and she goes, in yoga, we talk about all these Sanskrit concepts and words like prana, life energy and breath, and, karma and dharma and blah. She's like, he kind of said to you like Sukha, like you give him that feeling of self-fulfillment where he's done something great. He's done it in such a way he's proud of it. It's not that end of the day, like, oh, I suck. I didn't get my work done. She's like, I think ultimately what you're trying to do is you're using these productivity tools simply as the path so people can get to their self-fulfillment. She's like, that's Sukha. And I was like, done. And then from bed that night in Bali, I bought the website, the Sukha Company. I was like, we're going to call it the Happiness Company. That's what we're going to do. Let's see how this goes. And that sense of like, this is meaningful. I'm in my lane. I'm doing what I'm meant to do is really what I hope people, whether it's just listening to me or they email me and they have questions about, oh, can you send me a link to that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi book? I want to read that, or I want to read that Cal Newport blog, whatever it is, however I can help. That's ultimately what I think this is about. It's not about, oh man, I just want that music, or I just want that timer or that smart assistant. It's ultimately going, I want to have that feeling at 3 o'clock where I'm like, what would I like to do now? Because I've done what I needed to do and it feels great. Anyway, back to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I mean, I love hearing about how bouncing ideas off of other people is always so helpful sometimes. Yeah, to come up with new things and achieve what you want to. So, how do you think that being part of a community can assist in motivation and productivity?
You know what it is it's really about those days when you need something more. Because when you're part of a community, you have some people who are up today, some people who need something today. They need that energy, that motivation. And when you are all on your own, you have a bad day and you're kind of on your own, And when you're part of a community, they lift you up. And it also feels great to lift other people up.
Mm. Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I mean, being a part of a community for me is like, I used to go to Pilates classes, and that's kind of something you can do in your own home, a bit like yoga, like you've been talking about.
Yes.
And I go to dance classes as well, where I have friends, and I just find that I cannot get the same exercise out of me without having those other people around to sort of,
Totally
you feel
agree.
like you've got to keep up and they're encouraging you. And it's just a fantastic environment, honestly.
And it also keeps you accountable, where it's like, Sarah, where were you yesterday? You're like, oh, I know. I'll be there Tuesday. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd love now to move on to our practices and habits segment of the podcast. This is where I want to ask you, what habit would you recommend people practicing to boost their productivity, especially when they're remote working?
Okay. There's a bunch of research, and this is going to sound so weird, but obvious at the same time. When you start, have 3 things, no more than 3. Yes, your back of your mind knows you have 17 things to do, and there's this thing and that thing, but when you start, lay out 3 things. And the weird brain hack of this is, if you say you're going to do 3 and keep 3 in your field of view mentally, you'll probably do 3. But if you say you're going to do 3 and you have 17 things in your list, you'll probably do 2. And there's a lot of research around that sense of like, oh, this is achievable, and you get it done. It's very similar to time boxing. When you say I have 45 minutes, it's weird the way it gets done in 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you find that people, when they're making their lists like this, do they find any challenges when they're doing that?
Yes, because at a certain point, you need to have some responsibility for yourself if you want to improve. It is very easy to coast through life and go, oh, the reason I didn't do this is Sarah emailed me that I had to get back. And then, the car, this thing. And then, dinner, that it's just excuse after excuse after excuse, which is I'm not taking responsibility for my life. So the practices we talk about, hey man, you know what? I'm going to actually spend 5 seconds and say, here are the 3 things that I'm going to do, and put them, in my like this session sort of bucket, instead of just saying, oh, I have a whole pad of stuff I have to do. I'll just dive in. Take those 3 to 5 seconds and just circle those things, write them down, put in your field of view. Like, you have to have that responsibility for yourself, going, I actually want to be better at this. I want to be done at 3, not I want to be at 6 o'clock going, where the hell did the day go? Right. So I think a lot of it comes down to, you have to, at some point, hopefully as an adult, take responsibility for you.
Yeah. That's really interesting advice. Taking responsibility and agency, I suppose, over your time as well.
Yes, completely.
Yeah. So I'd like to move now to our open mic segment. Now, I can tell by the way you're talking that we've touched on so many things and concepts that you're really passionate about. But this segment is your chance to talk about your passions. Doesn't have to be related to what we've been discussing so far. Promote anything that you want to promote. I mean, a lot of our guests come on here and they've written books, or in your case, founded companies or developed apps. So yeah, the floor is yours.
That is very sweet of you. So I will tell you this, the joy that I have felt in learning about how I could have a happy 3 p.m. instead of a frustrated 6 p.m., I'm very inspired to share. I've been working on that for 6 years, of just learning more about myself, talking to other people, reading the books, testing it through my platform, like literally like laying out tools and offering the community the opportunity to vote. Say, which of these do you think would be most valuable for you? And then watching it. Like, one of the metrics I'm really proud of is, I know in the aggregate, not one specific task, but in the aggregate of all the tasks in the platform, over 500,000 tasks have gotten done. And I know that people have a very specific curve as they join. Members early on, if they do time box, they say, okay, this should take an hour. This should take 30 minutes. Da, da, da. In week 2, in week 3, week 4, it is amazing the way they keep lowering their estimates, because they're like, wow, when I actually focus, I didn't need an hour. I needed like 42 minutes most of the time. And we help you with that, So that sense of like, other people are getting to live the lives that they want to lead, that makes me incredibly happy. I'll be very personal, which is, I had 2 sort of life events in the last year. One is, my wife is pregnant, right? So I've spent a bunch of time thinking about, what is it I have to give back? Like, what will my son and eventually daughter say? Dad does this and it's really cool, better than dad sells sugary cereal to kids, right? Don't really want to be that guy, right? With food dye in it. So
Yeah.
that's been a big one for me of, okay, what am I doing to give back? So that is why I offer, you can put my email address in the show notes. Anyone who has a question, who's like, hey man, I'm wrestling with this. Can you point me to something to read or something, to a YouTube video to watch? Happy to do that. I probably will not be able to write back a 19 paragraph, this is a prognosis for, everything that you need to know. But I do try to get back to every email within 24 hours, right? And it may be very short, saying, hey, Sarah, glad you wrote. Here's a great Cal Newport blog. This probably addresses what you're talking about, right? So I'm very open to that. It doesn't have to be about my company. It doesn't have to be about money. It doesn't have to be anything. It can be just like, hey, man, I dug what you were saying. I'd like to know more about that book, right? So that is a thing that I offer. And that's really kind of what I'm passionate about. I also found out that it looks like I have cancer. So I've been contemplating a lot, how long is the road ahead of me? And, what do I do with each day? And it's a sort of nebulous state. We don't know which way it's going to go right now. But it's, again, giving me pause to say, okay, how am I leaving, behind something that hopefully helps people, as opposed to like, oh, he worked on Die Hard 5. Not a very good movie. I'm just telling you now.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing those personal stories with us as well. It's really interesting to see, and to see how people might value different things in their life, or what can I give back, or what am I leaving behind? I think those are things that people might think about, but maybe less so when, like for me, I'm quite young. It's like, well, I'm not really thinking about leaving a legacy too much at the moment. So, but I do find it really interesting, a really interesting conversation to have. So thank you for sharing. So we're going to wrap up our episode now. If our listeners, I mean, you mentioned your email, but if our listeners want to find out more about you and your work, where should they go?
Easiest thing to do, find out about me, is, they can email me, they can Google me. There's a lot about me online. And if they want help with these tools, they can go to the Sukha.co, the Sukha Company. And, there's
Amazing.
a 7-day free trial, no credit card. It's like, use it. If you love it, you can sign up for paying us. And if you don't have to pay anything.
Perfect. That's amazing. Well, thank you for joining us on the show. I've certainly learnt a lot from you, and I think the topics that we've touched on today are things that I have seen a little bit about in the past, but now we've really fleshed it out. So I'm really thankful for being able to have this conversation with you today. And to our audience, I hope you've learnt just as much as I have, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you for having me. And you're right, we talked about a lot of things.
Yeah.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.